Hi everyone, welcome back to MHN Tech Pulse, our podcast at the intersection of technology and the multifamily industry. I'm your host, Matthew Kaufman. AI is shaking up many aspects of the apartment sector, as we all know, from marketing to leasing to operations. But I think one aspect that's less discussed is how the tech can be applied to the construction of apartment buildings. To learn more about how AI has already been deployed in multifamily projects, along with what its future potential is, I turn to James Garner, a member of the Construction Professional Group panel at the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, or RICS. He's also the head of AI and data at Gleeds. Garner is a more than 2-decade veteran of the construction industry who has helped develop industry standards surrounding the use of artificial intelligence. He also publishes Project Flux, a weekly newsletter and podcast that discusses all things AI, data, and digital transformation. Here's our conversation. Hi, James. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So I want to start out by asking, from your vantage point at RICS, where is AI already having the biggest impact across construction in the built environment, and how much of that activity is happening in multifamily development specifically?
Well, I think AI, we're at the very beginning of the AI journey. I know it feels like it's been around for a long, long time, ever since ChatGPT kind of hit us. And actually, AI goes back a lot further than ChatGPT. In fact, the term was coined all the way back in the 1950s. So it's been quite a long journey to get to this point, but we've got to the point that it at last feels real, and people are getting real benefits out of it in the real world, not just kind of in scientific communities. So in one sense, it feels like it's been around for a long, long time. But the reality is we're still very, very early in this journey. And a lot of people are at that kind of experimental phase with it. And that's exactly the same in the construction, built environment and multifamily developments. I mean, there is no difference really from what I'm seeing across sectors. Everyone's still at that kind of curiosity, experimental phase. But that doesn't mean people aren't getting real value out of it. But a lot of it is the kind of what I would say the easy wins. So as people are grappling with the technology, it's more, I've seen people using it very, very simply to create simple agents, to be able to go through huge amounts of information, being able to research much more effectively, being able to basically sift through huge amounts of contract clauses, things like that. That's what it's really useful for. Of course, that sounds to people who are well into AI quite simplistic now, because we're moving on to this more agentic kind of agenda where the AI is starting to be able to do things for people. But we have to remember that everyone's at a different point on their journey. Not everyone's had that kind of light bulb moment. So what I say is it doesn't really matter where you are, your journey. You might be somebody who's at the very beginning still using it at a very cursory basis, or you might be somebody who is, creating your own open clause and doing your own kind of multi-level agentic agents. It doesn't really matter. I think we're still very much at the experimental phase. So we'll probably look back at this time with some of the use cases, maybe in 3, 4, 5 years' time, as quite quaint applications of the technology. But that doesn't mean it's not useful. So I think in most of the kind of construction built environment examples that I've seen, it's been people using it to maybe speed up processes maybe by 20, 30%. And that's really good, right? That's
Wow.
sniff that. It's having real impact on speeding up workflows. We haven't really seen yet. We're just starting to see the starts of people reinventing workflows, looking at how are we delivering things, and is it just a case of using AI to automate those processes, or are we starting to think about why are we doing that in the first place, if that makes sense. So we're at this kind of weird stage. It's a bit like, for those old enough, being at the beginning of the internet in the early 90s. Yeah, it's really hard to kind of figure out where it's going. And as I said, we look back at some of the use cases now in the 1990s internet, quite quaint, and we kind of laugh about it. But it was a necessary step in the journey.
Right. So looking at construction workflows specifically, where are you seeing the most practical and immediate uses of people in the industry using AI?
So like I say, I think taking some examples of very familiar workflows. So for instance, if you've got a huge tender documentation to go out or to review, one thing that's definitely increased in the construction industry in recent years is the volume of information. So the ability to kind of synthesize and digest loads of information is really quite difficult. So I think AI is a really good use case for that, because it is very, very good at being able to go through huge piles of information and summarize it and give you what the key points are. So that's one use case. Other use cases are more what I would call vertical solutions. So what I mean by that is like distinct AI applications used for a specific function. So a good example of that is there's a company called Nplan, who are, I think they're invested in by Alphabet, who are the Google's parent company. They've developed an AI system specifically for developing schedules, trained on about 1 million different schedules. So that's what I call a narrow vertical AI use case. And that's a really good use case. And they've got a tool that you can download and try out for free. And it's a bit like ChatGPT, but for schedules, if that makes sense. And for any process that you can think of in construction, all the way from the very beginning, the briefing stage, all the way through to the maintenance stage, there will be these vertical solutions that exist. There's literally thousands of them popping up now. So it's a combination of people finding and experimenting with these vertical solutions for a specific task, and then people using the generalized systems, the horizontal systems, as I call them, like Copilot or ChatGPT or Claude, to do a lot of kind of the general grunt work, as I call it, which is the best way I describe it, Matthew, is the kind of work where you're sitting there moving data from one spreadsheet to another. Right? And there's a lot of that goes on in construction. You're bringing invoices in, you're reconciling numbers. A lot of that can be automated. And that's where I see a lot of people getting to the answer faster so they can then provide judgment and add value to this stage. So we're not at the stage yet where we can rely on the output, of course. So one of the things that I preach and RICS preach is all around that, taking responsibility for the output, because we're probably hitting sort of 85-90% accuracy on some of the things that these generative AI systems provide, but you still need the human in the loop at the beginning and the end. I mean, I actually don't like the term human in the loop. I prefer bookending, because the problem with human in the loop, it sounds like the human is subservient to the AI, which I don't like. But I like bookending, because then it feels a bit more like we're in charge. Human at the beginning, providing the brief, telling the AI what you want it to do, and then human at the end, really responsibility and lining up nicely with the explainability part of the RICS responsible use of AI, is taking responsibility for that output. So, we're at that point where people are doing, it's the unsexy stuff, but it's providing that kind of 20-30% efficiency gains. But I think it's also like I said before, it's a necessary step, because that is a step towards people realizing how powerful this technology is, and then thinking about, well, hang on, why am I doing it like this in the first place? So this is a really important phase for people to go through. You can't kind of jump straight to the next phase, which is going to be the more transformative phase.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting way to put it. So we know that AI doesn't work if there's not a large amount of quality data that it can learn from. So what kinds of data in construction is most valuable when implementing AI systems, and how difficult is it to centralize all of that data?
Yeah, so good question. So the AI is only ever as good as the data, and the old adage, I know it's a cliche, but it's true, rubbish in, rubbish out, right? And that's kind of ever more so with AI. And the problem with our industry is that it's incredibly fragmented. Right? We've got loads of different suppliers, loads of different subcontractors, loads of different information. We do not have a shortage of data, change orders, RFI logs, schedule durations, cost estimates, you name it, we've got the data. But people talk about data being the new oil. Again, another cliche. I'm not trying to go for every cliche in the book, but I kind of disagree with that, because what we've got is unrefined oil. And what we've got to go through is refining that oil to make it readable by the AI, so the AI can make sense of it. Now, a step change has happened in that before these generative AI systems became as good as they are now, you really needed very, very structured data to make sense of things. So that meant putting all your data into very clean tables, Where that's changed slightly is actually these models, the generative models, are really good at making sense of a bit messy data. Like, not, obviously, if it's terrible, it's going to have a hard time, but it can make pretty good sense of messy data, and it can make pretty good sense of non-text data, so PDFs or pictures. The computer vision's getting better and better. So now we're reaching a point where, as long as we get our data in a semi-decent order, we can make really, really good sense of it. So all the data is valuable. And what I say to people is, rather than worrying about, maybe 20 or 30 years of legacy data, almost draw a line in the sand and say, well, from now, because I don't have to go to the nth degree to keep everything absolutely organized, I can start making my data much more ready for AI. And I use the old adage again. I am going through every cliche and kind of saying in the book, but it's a good way of describing it. The best time to plant an oak tree was 20 years ago or today, right? I don't know if you've heard that saying. And that's what I say about data. Don't worry too much about your legacy data, because actually in construction, any data more than 3 years old is not very useful, because things change so quickly. So you're not really throwing away 20 years of data. You're probably at worst throwing away 3 years of data. And you don't even have to disregard that. What I'd say is get your processes in place for now forward. And once you've done that, then you can start maybe having a look at some of your more historical data. So in answer to the question, all the data is valuable in different ways. And we kind of in this really great position where we don't have to make the choice so much, because AI, as I said, is really good at understanding this data. Sometimes it's just as simple as pointing your AI at, or your SharePoint, or wherever you kind of accumulate your data, pointing that to the AI, and it can make a pretty good go of understanding that data.
So you mentioned that we're still in these kinds of early stages where people are figuring out how AI can tweak their workflows and not really transform it just yet. What do you think is preventing that broader AI adoption? Is it a culture issue? Is it a cost? Or are these technologies just not ready?
So I don't think it's a cost, because unlike previous technologies, actually this stuff is dirt cheap. I don't know what the license for Copilot is, but it's around $20 per user per month. So if you're an SME, like a 10 or 20 person company, we're talking about not very much money to implement this technology. And the other thing is, you don't need to do it all in one go. You don't need like that big bang where you make this huge decision. You can kind of do it in phases. So unlike other technologies, I don't think cost is the barrier. It really is culture. And there is, and we shouldn't dismiss it. I'm not one to dismiss it. That we're facing some significant changes, not just to our industry, but to society, really, through AI. And when you ask people to change the way they've been doing things, maybe sometimes 30, 40, 50 years, it's not as simple as like saying, well, as of tomorrow, you're going to start using this technology. And you've got to be very kind of receptive to people's views. Now, there's a good framework for this, which is Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. He talked about the doomers, gloomers, bloomers, and zoomers, which you may have heard of. Now, I love that way of framing it. It is a bit simplistic, but it also enables people to understand where they sit. And I always say to people, where do you sit in that? Are you a doomer? You think this AI is just going to ruin society, actually maybe extinct humanity? Or are you a gloomer? You're the kind of person who's just worried about it taking your job and all the fears around job displacement. Are you a bloomer, the kind of person who wants to adopt it, but you want to do it cautiously and carefully? Or are you a zoomer and you're like full steam ahead? Now, the important thing about this, when it comes to your question of culture, is that all those views are valid. And because none of us know the answer, right? Like even the frontier labs and even the Googles and the OpenAIs of this world don't actually know how this is going to all play out over the course of the next few years. And actually, Sam Altman and Dario Amodeo from OpenAI and Anthropic, respectively, have actually changed their mind recently, having talked about sort of huge job displacement. They're now saying we don't think that's the case. Now, that may have something to do with the big IPOs coming up and everything else. But the point is that this is a moving feast. So going back to my point about culture, you have to be receptive to people's views. And if someone is a gloomer, you can't just dismiss it. You have to understand the reasons behind it, because there's probably very good reasons behind it. And so it's not people necessarily being awkward on purpose to say, I'm not going to adopt this technology. There'll be, kind of foundational reasons behind those decisions, and you have to work with people. Now, from my experience, if you find somebody who is a bit of a doomer, but you work with them and you show them the potential and how this can positively impact their lives, and they can then become your biggest supporters. I've seen that happen a number of times in different organizations where the biggest doomer has become the biggest kind of champion for the adoption of AI. And then that comes with a huge amount of weight, because then there's that person saying, look, I was like you. I was not a fan of this technology. I was worried about it. I've got to tell you, I've changed my mind. There's nothing more powerful than a story like that. So culture is a really important thing to think about, particularly in our industry when it's so fragmented. It's quite traditional. It's quite fragmented. We have to approach this with caution. So from my point of view, I can sometimes get frustrated. Like, why aren't you using this stuff? It's incredible. But then I have to kind of step back and say, right, we're on a journey. It's like the internet in 1990. Not everyone adopted it the minute it was available. There were still problems with it. There's still problems with AI at the moment, and you have to work with people to make them feel comfortable enough to start gently changing some of their workflows.
So moving alongside this rise in AI in the broader economy, we're also seeing a rise of development in robotics, which seems to be progressing even faster. So what do you think the applications of robotics are to commercial and multifamily construction?
So, I mean, I actually don't separate the two. All the robotics are a physical embodiment of AI. At the moment, when we talk about AI, we just think of it as a chatbot, because that's the way that we interact with it. Now, that clearly is not going to be the final point of AI. It's going to become embodied in robotics, and not just humanoid robotics, but all kinds of things that we use around our home and in our lives. Like, in the next 10 years, we'll probably see AI in everything. Now, a lot of people will already be experiencing this if they've got a Tesla or a driverless car, that's already effectively a robot on wheels. And that's already impacting our industry, because we probably got kind of driverless deliveries happening through the use of embodied AI in vehicles. So the next obvious thing is the humanoid robots. Everyone gets very excited about humanoid robotics because it looks human and it reminds you of humans, and it's also really cool because it reminds you of all your favorite sci-fi, and you think you're going to get your own C-3PO. But there's a really important point with it, which is the amount of money going into the humanoid robotics. And then people say, well, why are we designing robots like humans? Surely you wouldn't design it like humans. Why wouldn't it have 3 hands or 5 hands? Well, there's two answers to that. Number one, it's a familiar form that we can all relate to. Number two, we live in a world built for humans. So the humanoid robotics are going to be a really important step through, but they won't be the only type of robots. But when it comes to construction, I'm very optimistic about the use of these robots on construction, because one thing we've got on both sides of the pond is a huge skill shortage when it comes to actually delivering the construction. And that's not going to get any better. It's only going to get worse. So we actually need more bodies, and it doesn't really matter whether that's a human body or a robotic body. And actually, one of the things that construction is dangerous. And too many people still get injured or die on construction sites. So the immediate kind of application for me is, if we can put a humanoid robot in harm's way rather than a human, then that's an obvious starting point. And then I think what we're going to probably start seeing throughout the course of the next decade is it becoming more and more normal to see these humanoid robotics. In fact, on my podcast, when I was looking at prediction this year earlier, in January, one of the things I predicted was at some point this year, people will start seeing their first humanoid robot in some kind of environment. And I've got to tell you, we're only in June and I've seen it 3 times now. So, wow. Digital Construction Week in London Excel Centre. I saw it in Amsterdam at the Autodesk conference, and I can't remember the other place. I think it was just an exhibition somewhere. So it's coming out from the kind of YouTube videos into the real world. And the next step will be people seeing it on sites. Now, there's a contractor in the UK called Tilbury Douglas. They're actually using a humanoid robot to go around site in terms of helping with progress tracking. Because when we come to progress tracking, you could be the best project manager, best surveyor in the world, but we've got one major flaw, which is we've only got two eyes and they look right in front of us. Right. Well, if you've got a humanoid robot doing it, they can wear 360 camera and they can be going as long as you want. So I think the whole robotics thing is going to take a while. I'll be honest, we're not quite there yet. There's still a lot of work to do to get it up to kind of being production ready. But we know that the likes of Tesla and Elon Musk are, making huge bets on their humanoid robot, which is called Optimus. And we know that in China, they're going really great guns. They got their figure one robot and what have you. So I think kind of watch this space with robotics. It's going to become very, very normal. And I saw an interview with Elon Musk just today, actually, when I was on the train, and someone asked him, how much do you think these are going to be worth? He goes, well, once we get to about 1 million units, which isn't very much, he thinks they'll be around $20,000, $20,000 to $25,000, which sounds a lot, but you can easily see that that's kind of the price of a car, a relatively modest car. So I think it won't be too long before they become quite domestic. Like most of us will have a robot as well as a car, and then in construction it will just become very normal. Like why would you put a human into a difficult, dangerous scenario when you could put a humanoid robot? But that's going to mean that the humans their role's going to change, right? Now, and this brings me to an important point about job displacement, which I think is, and I want to put an optimistic note on this, is that people think, it's going to create job displacement, but they confuse the difference between a job and a task. So yes, your task can be automated, right? A task is something that can be automated, but most people in construction, their job is a number of different tasks. And actually, it might be that your job just means controlling a robot or an AI that does some of your tasks, but your job is still to coordinate all of that. If that makes sense. So I'm very optimistic about it, quite excited about it all, to be honest.
And you mentioned the progress tracking aspect of the robotics. Do you think that that's kind of the main application, or will we also see humanoid robots on construction sites, doing the actual building and construction of projects?
Yeah, so that's a good starting point. With all these things, that it happens, sequentially over time. You find something that's going to be very, very sort of uncontroversial. No one's going to get too upset about a robot taking photos. And then, like I say, you'll probably find some of the dangerous situations that, again, people will be like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then it will just become more and more normal to start seeing robots on site. And then eventually, don't forget, if you go to the manufacturing sector, they'll even laugh at this conversation because they've been using robots for absolutely years. Obviously, it's not humanoid robots, but that's just the way you manufacture a car, right? Or you manufacture any kind of electronic device, really. It's done with robotics. Obviously, construction is slightly different because we don't have a unique product that we can just put on a conveyor belt and go boom, 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 boom. So, yes, the humanoid robots are going to free up construction to make the use of robotics, but it's really nothing new in terms of manufacturing. Like and I know the BMW facility, for instance, has got humanoid robots. They've had them there for quite some time. So I think it will just become normalized over time. And then it'll be one of those things where we'll look back and say, oh yeah, do you remember those days when humans used to be on site?
Yeah. So switching to a bit of a different perspective now, how are lenders and insurers and investors reacting to the growing use and potential of AI in construction and project management?
Yeah, and again, with most things, it's mixed, right? So, and there's a lot to unpack there because they'll all have different views. So if you're an investor, your main kind of focus is going to be on profit, and anything that's going to be able to drive the affordability and being able to make money out of their investment, they're going to be all for. So that they'll have a different view of it than an insurer. And like, I'm not an insurer, so this is just my kind of gut feel, like disclaimer. But they're going to be a bit more cautious about it because they have to underwrite what people are doing. But that comes back to the brilliant work that RICS has done in terms of the responsible use of AI, because that helps an insurer understand that there are some processes in place that that surveyors and project managers should follow to make sure that they are using AI responsibly. I think we are very much in that experimental phase. So I've seen various kind of responses to AI from investors and clients, from some saying, oh, well, what's the reduction in your fee because you're using AI, which is, to me, quite a dangerous route to go down, because that becomes very much a race to the bottom. To other investors who don't care, I'm happy to pay more as long as the output's better. So what I think is going to happen is we're going to go through a bit of a change in the way that we model professional services. Now, I was listening to a podcast recently where they were talking about the change from an inputs-based model to an outputs-based model. So, historically, we've always charged, or clients, professional services, not just in construction, but generally, like lawyers are a good example, have always charged for services by time. Right, so you go and see a lawyer, they get the clock running, and they charge you per hour, and that's the way nearly any management consultants will do the same thing. And even if you get a fixed fee, it's always kind of built up on the basis of how long are people going to spend at this task. So the client has got very used to paying for the inputs, regardless of what the output is. So sometimes the output could be lousy, but they still have to pay because someone said, well, I've spent this much time on it. I think we're going to, but you wouldn't counter that if you go to the shops and buy a loaf of bread. You wouldn't ask for an output of, how long has that taken? How many man hours has gone into that loaf of bread? Because you pay for it based on market forces. Like, what are you willing to pay, and how much are you willing to pay for that product? And if it's a good quality loaf of bread, you're happy to pay more, and you don't really argue about it. You just pay it. And I think that's where we're going to move to, in that more outputs-based outcome, where investors will be happy to pay more as long as the output's better. They're paying for the output. But if the output's not good, they're not going to pay for it. So, that's quite an optimistic way of looking at it. But as I said, you brought in quite a lot of different personas there. Like an insurer, no doubt, will be a lot more nervous about this and what it means for them, because insurers like certainty, and insurers like to know, this is the percentage times that these kind of projects go wrong, so this is how I create my premiums. So for an insurer, they'll have a totally different kind of sense of things. And my prediction is, there's going to be this adjustment period probably over the next few years as people really learn to understand what this means for them, for their particular business.
Got it. And so RICS has put out a report on responsible use of AI in the industry. Can you talk a little bit about what the ethical and governance concerns are that the industry should be paying attention to as adoption of AI increases?
Yeah, so the standard was it was written as a response to concern from members about how do we deal with this new technology. And most other institutions have been pretty silent on it. And actually, we got a huge problem around governance globally, because there isn't actually any kind of global standard. So you've got, there's something called the EU AI Act, which applies to EU countries. The UK has nothing at the moment. I think the US, there's different laws in different states, which makes it very, very confusing.
Yes.
So there was a lot of confusion about, well, what do I do? So I think what RICS tried to do is say, well, look, this is what we want our members to do. And what they did, and I was a member of the working group, so I was really proud to be a member of that working group, and I learned so much from listening to the members, because whilst everyone hates governance and regulation and anything like that, because it always feels very formal, actually this wasn't a stick to beat people with. It was meant to be helpful, and all of it is very much common sense. And there's more to it than this. I'm going to simplify it a little bit for your listeners, but it will help them. It kind of separates it into 4 distinct parts, as far as I can see. Number 1 was about AI awareness. So there's a kind of saying within it that all surveyors should have a baseline knowledge of AI.
Hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that people need to learn how to program neural networks and
Hmm.
all the mechanics of it, but they need to understand like the kind of things we've been talking about today. Like, what is it safe? When is it safe to be used? When is it not safe to be used? How can I use it responsibly? What are some of the kind of dangers of using it? All those kind of really common sense approaches to AI. The RICS, so that all surveyors need to have that, which is, to me, no brainer.
Hmm.
The second one is around governance, like how, whether you're a huge organization or you're a one man band, how do I prove that I've got the right governance? And that can be really simple things like ensuring that your risk register, your company risk register, acknowledges and understands the risks associated with AI, and that you've got mitigation strategies in place to deal with them. And it can be things like making sure that your data strategy is aligned, that there's not going to be any data leakage, the data sovereignty is in the right place. And that can be as simple as, for a small company, it might be implementing Copilot and making sure that the Azure kind of infrastructure is in the right territory, things like that. And it can also be making sure you've got company-wide AI policies, like telling people how to use AI. So that kind of thing when it comes to the governance. The third part of it is about how to use AI. And this is the bit that probably touches most people in terms of surveyors using AI. And that's as simple as understanding how to procure AI safely, like the right questions to ask when you're procuring an AI system. It's around understanding around transparency. So what do we have to do? What do we have to say to our clients? Like, it's not a dirty word. It's like you wouldn't say to a client, you'd be quite happy to disclose to a client that you're using Excel. So why not say, client, I'm using AI? So, but you have to be very transparent about it. You have to say that you are using AI to help you with your work, but you're taking responsibility. And then they use this great word, which I think they took from the EU AI Act, which is called explainability. Like, and the principle there is that if you use AI to help you with some kind of output, you have to take responsibility for that output, and you have to be able to explain it to a client. And you can't use the excuse, well, AI generated it for me, therefore I don't know. And that, again, all common sense, right? There's nothing there that anyone would say, that sounds ridiculous. And it also talks about having a material impact on the delivery of a service. So this is to differentiate like national uses of AI, like spell checks. I mean, no one's really cares too much about that. It may be embarrassing that you get a spelling wrong, but that's a different kettle of fish from AI generating work, which could have hallucinations in it and could have inaccuracies in it. And then the fourth part is around people developing AI systems. So this won't apply to everyone, but there are companies out there developing or fine-tuning or configuring their own AI systems or creating a harness for their own AI systems. So that's really about how are you ensuring that bias isn't creeping into your models or into the way that you're using AI. So again, for those people in sort of software development, that it's all common sense kind of approaches. So that's the standard in a nutshell. But what I would say to people is read it. It's not a huge document. It's very easy to read. There's nothing in there that I don't believe there's anything in there that you kind of look at and think that doesn't make sense. Why are you doing that? I think the thing to add is it is the first version, and I think RICS have been quite bold to do something what other institutions haven't done, and no doubt it won't be the final version either, because the technology is moving so fast that it will need to be revisited. I mean, we're moving into this agentic world, so it'll probably need a refresh at some point about how to deal with agentic behaviors and things like that. So it's by no means meant to be a final version, but it's good that members have got something to cling on to.
Yeah, I definitely think so, because I think a lot of people can get overwhelmed by just what the potential is, and if they're not having some concrete guidance from some organization that they trust, they might just tune it all out. But if they have some concrete advice that they can turn to, I think that's helpful for them.
Exactly. So that's all it's been to be. So I think it's a really positive step.
So one last question that I finish all my podcasts with If we revisit this conversation, let's say 1 year or even 5 years from now, how do you think AI will have changed the construction landscape?
That's a big question. And it really is sort of future gazing, because it's so hard to predict, because in some senses, things are moving faster than I can keep up with. So from a technological point of view, I think it's going to move incredibly fast. I guess the doubt for me is how fast we are going to adopt it, and a lot will depend on outside forces. So if you look at other industries, the ones that change very, very fast are the ones that are disrupted by an outsider. So if you take the music industry with Spotify, or the movie industry with Netflix, they were disrupted. The incumbents wouldn't have changed nearly so fast voluntarily. But they had to react to an outsider. So I think with our industry, I will caveat my answer with, it depends if there is a huge disruptor. So on the assumption that there is, because I would be surprised if there isn't, I think we're going to see, as I said, a total change in the way that the model works, and hierarchies will start changing as well in terms of the fragmented nature of what we do. I would like to think that what we end up doing is releasing huge bottlenecks in the industry. There's too many of our projects are made unfeasible because of various bottlenecks, whether that's affordability, whether that's planning, whether that's political issues. And a lot of those are there because there's a human bottleneck somewhere in the loop. So my hope is that we'll end up in a situation where we've got some kind of golden age of construction going on, because there'll be so many projects entering the workload that this kind of concern that we have about job displacement kind of disappears. Because as Geoffrey Hinton, who worked for Google, he's called the godfather of AI, he predicted that all radiologists would be out of a job 10 years ago, because the AI would be better at detecting all kind of diseases. Well, what's actually happened is, yes, the AI is better at detecting diseases than humans, but we now have more radiologists than ever, because the radiologist was the bottleneck, and now we're detecting and diagnosing more diseases than ever. So you need more radiologists to kind of do the human side. So my great hope, and this is, I'd be interested to come back to this in 5 years' time, is that we release these bottlenecks because of the technology, and we end up with more need for surveyors than ever before to manage not just humans, but a whole raft of agents and robots. Delivering projects, delivering real value for people.
Right. Well, we'll definitely have to look back on this discussion in the future and see if that's
how wrong
panned
I
out.
was.
Well, thanks again for taking the time today, James. I really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of MHN Tech Pulse. If you like this episode, be sure to follow, rate, and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to MHN's YouTube channel as well. We'll be back next quarter with another installment of MHN Tech Pulse. See you next time.